Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to another video. In my last one, I built Hangman using Python. Uh, I kind of hand drew all the graphics, and I mean, I was happy with it, but I decided to go into Blender because I wanted to start working on making like small world models and stuff like that, just so I can get better for when I need to make my own game assets. But so I kind of came up with a 3D Hangman, and I was gonna have animated characters on it, but I thought like that was a little much for Hangman. So I came back into Pygame and just updated my Nighty Knight Hangman style game with my updated graphics. So I went with a 900 by 900 screen this time instead of the skinnier screen, just because I wanted to fit in the whole graphic that I created, but I still had the same categories, but I just added some categories at the bottom, and then I removed my instruction pop-up and just threw some instructions down here at the bottom. I thought it looked a little cleaner. Uh, Changed the colors around, went with more of a like a I guess a medieval color scheme is kind of what I looked up online and was looking for colors that I liked. But just to show you the update, so I made a little window for guesses, so it kind of separates it off the screen, so it kind of draws your attention to what you're doing. Category, colors, chance of 6, so I added that up to the side instead of kind of in the middle, and then your word, I put it right below the graphic, and then just kind of, so I didn't do a knight, even though it's Nighty Knight, so I still don't have the skills quite yet to kind of make characters how I want them, but I'll probably get practice, and I'll probably end up coming back to this later down the road and actually putting a knight character in it. But for now, I just did a little white character. I just rendered it and just left it with the base material, which is just the white material that you're seeing. And then I made this translucent background so that even when you win or lose, you can kind of see the knight in the background, which I thought was a better touch than just putting this solid color right on top. You could maybe add like your word or like another message down here at the bottom because it's a lot of empty space. But I kind of like the look. Uh, I I did have one issue where I was printing the screen twice in my code. So as you would be on this screen, it would slowly no longer be translucent because it printed so many onto the page. So that was an issue. So I cleared that up. So now it clears the screen out outside the loop, so it doesn't constantly happen. And then I'll show you if it lets me click it. Not gonna let me click it. There we go. I think it's got to be my mouse pad because whenever I click down, it doesn't work. So here we go. So fruits, I'll just show you the lost page that I created. So same thing, I thought the transparent background looked better because now you see the character hanging there instead of like really on the last one I created, the background was kind of useless because, or having like that last hangman was useless because you never got to see him because it just threw the background or the you lost thing right up on top of it. So I liked it translucent, so I made it translucent. Uh, these now I switched it around, so it used to go all the way across the page and then reset. Now it stops after 7 letters. It'll go back and start printing a new row. And unless you have longer phrases or words that require more letters, this is really all the room you're going to need. But that was pretty much the update I wanted to show on that. And then I wanted to start working my skills in C++. So let me switch files here. Oh. But I just did a simple, I watched a tutorial. So I watched tutorials on that low poly style I did for the hangman background. And I'm actually going to have, when I update my GitHub, I'm going to have both versions in there, so you could kind of swap out if you wanted to try to build it on your own. You could use both sets of images if you really wanted to. So that'll be available. And then I just made a simple snake game. I followed a tutorial on this one because I've never used C++, so I've read a bunch of documentation on it, so to kind of understand what each thing I was doing. And then the tutorial I watched, the guy didn't comment anything, and he didn't really explain what anything was doing. It was just one of those where, hey, let's build Snake using C++, and then you're just kind of stuck like, okay, like I feel like I'm just copying you at this point. But I mean, I think I did a pretty good job running through, and I try to keep best practices because I read online like using the namespace right here in the front. Like you could do include namespace as std, and then you would never have to have this. You could just put count. But I saw that best practices people usually prefer to just keep the standard. That way you kind of have the namespace. That way you don't get confused if you have multiple namespaces that you're trying to sort through. So I'll kind of run through what I did. But this was this iostream .h here. That's for reading the keyboard, and then windows.h, that was for calling my sleep function. Bool, I'm just starting a game over bool, so it's going to start off as false, but once it's true, that's how we would end our game loop. And then constant int, these are going to be the game screen, my border for the window. This is my snake head, so snake, X snake and Y snake is a snake head. The fruit that gets displayed is the, X and Y of that. And then I have a tail with it's an array, and it'll have 100 positions. Same thing with Y for the tail. In tail, that's the length of my tail. And then I have a score that I initialized. Enum direction, so this is just bringing in direction into the game. Stop equals 0, so this is saying like, hey, when it's stopped, don't do anything. And then obviously the other directions. And then I save direction as move, so I could call it. So void, it's not returning anything, so just void. There was no reason to have it return a certain value. Game structure, game over is going to equal false to begin. Move, when you first start up the game, move is going to equal stop. That way, like typical snake, the snake's stationary until you hit your keys to begin with. And then this is going to put him in the middle of the board, but I didn't want him right in the dead center, so it's going to just -5 off of that. Snake height is just going to put him in the middle for the height of my board. And then random fruit, so basically random within width -2. So I put -2 here because my border, I want to make sure it doesn't spawn fruits on the border, so that's why I'm -2 there. If I did -1, it would put it right on the border because of the way my loop works, because my loop goes all the way up to it's you'll see it down here, but basically it's equal to, and that's so I needed a -2 there so that it wouldn't spawn on the board or right after the board. And then initialize the score. Void, same thing here. Pretty much all my functions in this one were void just because it wasn't returning anything. So this will be my main game screen. I'm going to clear the screen out every time, and that's just because we're basically printing to the terminal. We're not really actually moving pieces around, we're just printing objects. And then this is going to print the top row, so basically for I equals 0, I less than or equal to width, add 1 every loop, and that's all I++ is just add 1. And then print count is print, so which is pretty simple. So count, and then I'm trying to remember what the other one is off the top of my head, but basically all you do is you would use the other phrase and then swap. So that's how you would either print or take input. So then I just want hashes as my border. This is just, I want to print a new line, 1 line down. And then this loop gets a little crazy just because there's a couple loops within it. But so for height, so for the height I chose, basically do this for the whole way down. So now it's doing for the width, kind of like what we did up here, but if j equals 0, so if it's on the if it's right there on the left side, this is what's going to create the left side of the border, because if it's 0, that means put a hash, so that'll be the border. And then if the snake head is in that area, print the snake, which it'll always be in that area, so print the snake head. Else if I equals fruit and j equals fruit, print a, so that's just going to put for the height, basically if x and y, f I for the height, and then j for the x, because you got to kind of think of width being your x and I being your height or your y. Print the fruit, so I just did a for apple. And then for the right side border, that's all this is doing, and then it's going to drop down a line and basically keep doing that until the game board is full. And then else, this is how we get our tail printed. So we needed to do another bool, so print equals false. And then for int k in length of tail, basically if k is less than the length of tail, add 1. And then it's just going to basically add, it's going to take if x tail k equals, yep. So basically it's just looking to see if that tail equals the x and y of the game board, print the tail. And then print equal true, so it's going to put it on there. And then if not, it's just going to put spaces. So this is how you fill the board with empty space after it does all that. So that's that. This just prints the bottom of the game board right here. And then I'm printing to the screen your score is. This will be right below the game board. And then it's just putting score and then adding a new line. Not really needed, the new line, but I put it there so if you decide to print more afterwards. Now we need to handle player input, so I have my player input function. This is just read the keyboard and then get the keyboard. If it equals A, and I'm just using a switch, so it's going to switch between each. So if case equals A, left, D equals right, W equals up, S equals down. I could possibly switch to my arrow keys, but I would have to look up the codes for the arrow keys, and then it's just going to break it once it knows what direction you want to go. And then X, if you hit X, it'll end the game for you. And then we're going to bring everything together in game logic. So these get a little confusing, but I'll try to explain it. So if you're like, I had a lot of trouble. I had to sit here and read it like 5 or 6 times before I could kind of work it all out. But first, you're going to previous is set the snakehead. So right now, so previous, you got to think the tail at array 0 is going to be your snakehead. Is kind of how I saw it. And then you're initializing your second previous, and then that first array in tail is set to the snakehead. So now it's just going to go through that array, and it's going to keep updating the snake tail for every array that's been created so far. So every time you eat an apple, it adds 1 to the array. So this is going to make sure that it goes through that array to make sure that the snake tail is following the snakehead and turns where the snakehead turned, not like, because otherwise you don't want everything kind of moving all at once, if that makes sense. So you got to remember that the first tail was set to snake, and then so whatever tail this needs to be, so say it was my first tail, it's going to save it to previous 2, and then X previous becomes so snakehead would become the tail here, and then previous 2 equals X previous. So it kind of just keeps stair stepping down the line. I guess it's hard to explain kind of like where it makes sense, but like your second previous is set to the current tail piece, and then your tail is set to the tail in front of it, or your X previous is set to the next to that array, and then that array updates the X previous. So, I mean, I guess I probably just like had word vomit, but that's kind of in my head. You're just stair stepping. So like, it's like, all right, snakehead. All right, now tail 1 is going to equal the snakehead, and then tail 2 is going to equal tail 1, and it's going to keep stair stepping down to make sure that all the pieces are following. And then you're just going to take that movement here. So switch, I'm calling the direction that we created. And if the case is left, so if I was to hit A, that would be left. It's going to add, it's going to subtract from your snake X. So your X coordinate of the snakehead is going to keep moving it. So it would just constantly move left until you change direction. And then and that's all this is handling right here. And then default break. If nothing of this is true, it's just going to default, so that way your snake keeps kind of moving in that direction constantly. So if this just handles if the snake hits the game board. So if the X equals the width, and X snake is less than 0, and the Y equals the height, and the Y is less than 0, it would be game over. And these are ORs. I said and, but ORs, so excuse me. And then game over would equal true, so it would end the game. And then another way you could end the game is if the snake ate the snake head, or sorry, if the snake head touched the snake tail. And that's just if tail, if one of the array if the X of one of the arrays, one of the tails, equals the snake head, and the Y equals one of the arrays at the same time, that would be game over. So it'll iterate through every single tail to see if any of those tail pieces have ever touches the snake head, and then it would end the game. And then this is just if the snake eats a fruit, it's going to print a new fruit, add points, and then it's going to add a tail. And this just keeps it all running. So it just it builds the game structure. And then while it's not game over, print the game screen, take player input, and go through the game logic. Sleep 30 for sleep 30. This is just slowing my snake down so it's a little more playable. And then return 0. And it's even you don't have to write this. I write it just because I saw that it's still a good idea to write it. But your int main would always return 0, and it's assumed that it returns 0, so you don't technically have to write that. So I'll just go ahead and pull it up real quick. And you're going to see a lot of game flicker. And that's just because it's refreshing so much. So I found like it looks a little better for me if I go full screen. I click once and then I start playing. And just depending on how fast your like CPU is, from what I was reading and from what the tutorial was talking about, that can affect how fast the game flicker is. So you can kind of see like I did a bigger O for the snakehead, and then little O's for the body. And if this snake was moving a little slow for you, you could, like I said, lower that sleep function or remove that sleep function altogether. So it's optional. You don't have to have it. But now if we were to go out of bounds, it would be a loss. And then, so I think I'll probably try to make a graphic version of this using C++ still, because I know I could probably easily make it in Pygame. Like, I felt like I got pretty comfortable with Pygame, read through all the documentation, so I'm going to have to see what kind of graphic interface I need to handle graphics with C++. So hopefully, maybe in a week, I'll have something I can show. If you have any good ideas, like of what I should use, like drop it down in the comments below. This will be my first time with moving pieces, so I felt like I was starting pretty easy. And then after this one, I'll probably I mean, remaking games, I mean, it's not super fun for me, but I think I'll probably do Pong next. That way there's a player and an AI and then a moving piece. So it'll be three moving pieces, one being AI, one being the projectile that I'll have to probably use some math to calculate when it bounces off the board at what angle it should go. And then I could maybe try a second input so two players could play at once. So I think there's a lot to learn maybe with Pong, but for now I want to try to build this using uh, graphics and just something pretty fairly simple, but just to get me used to using graphics. I wanted to do C++ just because I've been reading a lot. It sounds like it's the industry standard across the board, and I do want to eventually make. I think after Pong, I will probably start working on my own game, uh, just because I think there's a lot to learn with fumbling through. Like I think you could do all the tutorials in the world, but it's not as good as just getting hit with a problem and then having to teach yourself out of it or asking for help and then learning from someone better than you. So yeah, follow along, drop a subscribe if you like. Love to hear what you think of the videos down in the comments, and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take it easy.